everybody new to join while we're waiting for people, it would be great if you can tell a bit about your work, like what exactly are you working on, and what's you interested in the permission blockchain, so we can better suit the presentation.
Oh, 1 second. Oh no, I can't. Okay, so I can't do video, but Scott, I'm from Toronto. I'm working on a project called the Crypto Improvement Fund. Basically, it's to facilitate the education in both the B2B space as well as consumer education of crypto and blockchain. And then, in addition to that, I'd like to focus on helping businesses build custom blockchain solutions. So that's how I first got involved with you guys. It was very nice to put a face to a name, Max. Nice to see you. I'm looking forward to the presentation. Helena showed it to me. It looks really good. You guys are doing a good job. But seriously, well, I'm gonna mute myself now, but I'll be here. So go ahead, do your thing.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we can start by bits. Anyway, we need to do some intros about ourselves for everybody who doesn't know us. So just for the sake of structure, we'll have 2 sections. My section, Max, would be about the business aspects of the permission blockchain. So I'll do some theory on that. So if you're an advanced user, you may be a bit bored on, like discussing what is permission blockchain. But in the end, I'll mention a couple of things about where it's suited better and where I think it's heading to. And afterwards, Alex, who's mostly on the technical engineering side, he'll discuss his analysis on the existing solutions in the permission blockchain space. He worked with lots of this technology, so he knows for his own experience, and he'll make a point about how would you approach the selection of the appropriate technology if you're going to use this.
Which points should you count on, to decide what is important and what is not when you pick in one or other solution?
Yeah,
some information about how does it work under the hood, but not very technical.
Yeah. So we'll try to finish this section for around 20 minutes, and after that, it would be great to have some live conversation about your relevant questions or problems and so on. So a bit about the organization we're doing this from. It's called Fire Labs. It's usually pronounced like something like 4i Labs or something. The name came from the fourth industrial revolution thing. And we've done some rebranding for the past 7 years. We did lots of IT products, mostly in mobile and web stuff. But from the start of last year, we're really diving deep into the blockchain. So we found it as one of the most interesting and perspective things we do for the emerging economy here. And we also, besides providing the service and consultancies on the site, we also develop a product for XCO. This is the investor panel that we're offering. So this is our start of our product story inside Fire Labs. And a couple, if you have any questions, I also take one eye on the chat, so you can also send something to the chat. I will put my attention there too. So I'm one of the co-founders of the company. We started, mentioned, more than 7 years ago. My experience mostly lies in the UX UI design. This is what I started really long ago, and also I've touched and worked on many products and projects during this time. What really inspires me is the whole decentralization thing. So both from the technical perspective and the management perspective. So I'm looking into building systems and organization that can sustain and live on their own and what we need to do that to get there. So all these anti-fragile things, autonomous organizations, and so on. And well, straight to the topic. We can speak a bit about the context of the permission blockchain. So, well, typically, like when I started to draft this presentation, I kind of had an impression that you have all those like we know this public, permissionless Bitcoin and Ethereum blockchains that everybody knows, and there's a bunch of technologies that are kind of hyping now. So like when this big corporation got into the space and they started to develop their like own products, for example, like JP Morgan or IBM with Linux and so on, you find a lot of interest in that, but it's really hard to understand the specifics of all these blockchains. And the other thing is there's always confusion between so-called public and private blockchain. So while Ethereum and Bitcoin are public blockchain, it doesn't mean that you can't like fork them, download them, and run them as the private blockchain. You can have your own private Ethereum, name it like as your own Ethereum. So the more correct way to distinguish the blockchains is like where you have permissionless space. So there's no needs in permissions, but for this enterprise level products and projects, you mostly would need some kind of permissions, and that's where all these cool technologies come into. So overall, like the basis is pretty common. So they're all P2P. They are ledgers. They are immutable. Like everybody syncs, is in the sync between each other on all the transactions mostly. So on this part, like those are the blockchains. But when we come to what differs is their tasks. So in the permissionless space, we like as mentioned, like everybody can join. So you just download the your node or like wallet or anything, right? And you can participate. You can manage all your transactions. Everybody has the same rights. So no difference between users. And in the permissioned blockchain, we like the terms are that like we have some types of roles, and those roles are pre-assigned and kind of can join by the invite. So for example, if there are like 5 organizations using this blockchain, each node is attached to some identity of this organization. So we don't come with an unknown anonymous organization. And when in the permissionless blockchain, we tend to see the data as public. You know, there's no direct owner, everybody's owner of this database. Usually in the like permission blockchain, there's a clear role or set of players who kind of main holders of this data. This also leads to different, so in the permissionless space, we have want to focus on the stability, because I've heard one comparison that like the public blockchain is like an ocean, rough ocean, where it's like lots of waves and storms and everything, and like permission private blockchain is vast in terms of like you don't have so much forces, you know, and so much unpredictability. But you like in the permissionless space, you need to foresee different types of attacks and different types of kind of illegal actions and transactions. And for that, you need more like tougher ways to more difficult ways to support the stability. While on the permission blockchain, while like like the main benefit of it, it's performance, you know, it's fast, because when you have all those identities in the place, you can really simplify the interaction. So you can have less, like you can have some kind of master nodes or something, and you can use different types of consensus instead of proof of stake and proof of work. You can use like more efficient in terms of time algorithms here. So this is basically like the main differences between those two. And let's see like who uses it. So we mostly see that in their asset management supply chain. So it's basically mostly the enterprise or consortia organizations that want to share some database inside to improve their work. And so there are like, it's not limited to only these use cases, but those are maybe the most important and perspective. Like for example, the cross bank and the R3 consortia is one of the, I think, biggest and strongest. But you also see that in the like energy trading, like in the fintech, insurance. We already see that on the government level as well. So we have that within the big organizational players. And why they choose this? Because the performance. So they want, like whenever I hear discussions between like Ethereum being not that good for the systems, being slow, the scalability is the main problem. So mostly whenever whoever thinks about doing his own blockchain, he thinks about putting the focus on the performance. So we want to see the Visa level type of speed when you have like thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands transactions per minute per second. So this is mostly achieved when we exclude mining from the formula. We also want usually enterprise are not keen to see their data being private, public. They want to share data, but only between the set rules and players. So the privacy is one of the that leads to the security. So while we like mining is a good way to like preserve the immutability of the blockchain, when we have when we don't need, when we know the players, we just can set up lower barriers and still have more secure network, because any transaction happening, we know who did this. Then you can, it's more controlled, which usually is really liked by the senior level staff. They really would like to be in the control of the data, in the control of the permissions, and that can be changed through the several one point of decision. And also one of the things we see, usually these blockchain solutions, especially on this wave of hype, the most known consultants like Consensus, for example, they are putting the price to really high level. But still we see that in some time, the blockchain tech can be a good competition to the standard databases. So we see that in some parts they could be lower the maintenance costs of the current IT infrastructure. So again, if we compare this to the Bitcoin being the biggest blockchain there, it's it can be compared to the internet whenever these permission blockchains are more like the intranets. And again, this the permission is more about the protocols rather than the specific technology. So there are different tools and engines out there, other means and so on, but still we should understand that it's just altered protocol from the public blockchain. So what outcomes are from the set? First of all, we have all these limitations and things we need to keep in mind. And sometimes we get requests from the organization that say, hey, we want to use blockchain inside, and like how we approach this, what we need to do, and we're trying to stop, let's understand if you really need this blockchain. And the core idea here is like, why do you need the blockchain? Because there's lots of, you know, lots of people tend to be the innovators, and they see that blockchain may be their achievement here, like introducing blockchain. But we need to understand that like you can do anything on the blockchain, but you don't have to. You know, like there are like sometimes more efficient ways with the databases, like typical databases and so on, that can easier get you there to solve some tasks. The blockchain comes into the play whenever there's really some trust issues between players. And well, for example, like the situation is different around the world, but for example, we here in Ukraine have a lot of trust issues with the government, for like per se. And when the governments like Ukraine and Georgia, they put, for example, the land registry on the blockchain, and everybody can, you know, assure that which transaction happened, how it happened, when you can exclude the parties that can bring delays and so on, you know, that you could do this trustless. This is a big win for the systems. It can be whenever players of some industry, like banks or insurance or energy, they try to make interaction between each other more efficient, but they are totally different organizations, and they somehow need to rely on the data, be sure that there's no one holder that can do some harm, you know, and provide unauthentic information. So this can be some systems like supply chains, where, you know, you also have different players that rely on the work between each other, and you want to see the movement of the values services. And another case I've heard is that like in the finance, for example, there could be one big corporation that's kind of like didn't have trust issues before, you can say, but with some regulation aspects, you may want to have more direct and clear access for the like auditor sides, being this the government, the policymakers, their financial auditors. So if you kind of play this open game, if you can easily provide access to the like some data to be audited by some needed parties, it can be also valuable here. The other thing that yeah, I think we'll leave that to the technical side.
Yeah,
right.
Let's leave it for later.
Yeah. So the other thing is that like immutability of the blockchain is both good and bad. Like for the organization, it's good because, you know, nobody can change something with like inappropriate date, or, you know, somehow else you trick the system, you know, like put something afterwards or change on the go. But then also you need to understand how we'll treat the mistakes. So for example, if in the case of the like mistake transaction, so for example, there are like 5 players, you know, like working between each other, autonomous organizations, and one organization is in the course of a mistake, they've sent the funds or transfer the asset rights to the other organization, you know, and it was put on the blockchain, but it shouldn't be the case, you know. It would be pretty tricky, you know. We'll need to have some kind of another layer of agreement on how would you treat that, because for everybody this transaction would be valid. So you can't just, you know, cancel that or delete that. So when designing the system, that should be something that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, you cannot tell like, oh, I changed my mind.
Yeah, so it's really like another day I was playing with this cool product called Aragon, where you kind of create an organization on the blockchain, and you can send the shares of this virtual company to some addresses on the Ethereum and so on. And I was just playing, and well, I kind of was figuring out the situation, and I made a mistake in the number of shares I'm gonna send. I clicked send, and they just gone. And afterwards, that's not much I can do after that. And I say, this is this is one of the design that blockchain is both good and bad. But this is how it goes. And well, for example, one of the ways to solve that is when you have two points of verification. So for example, if I'm providing somebody with like I'm transferring the asset and I'm taking it off, me as a sender should approve that, and the one who accepts this also should approve that, and only then this would happen. This could, for example, improve the situation here. And another thing is, like, with all this digitalization going through the companies, like blockchain is not a silver bullet. There's like so many processes left undigitalized right now and unclear. There's so many actions are taken by the manually by some human operators and so on some on their decision, on some guidelines and so on. So until you have you can't get the benefits of the blockchain, of this immutable, transparent, solid database, until you really have these processes outlined. And it's really hard task to when you have this thing with you can't change easily the data you've put it into, and you also have different mistakes and processes, and it's not always clear on how to it should be resolved. That could be a nightmare to put it on the blockchain. So sometimes the typical automation is coming before, and the best implementation of the blockchains, in my opinion, would come into the already really automated, good capped processes and digital systems. So a couple of things. So where it's headed? Well, currently, when we started to work with, one of the first things we touched was, of course, Ethereum, but mostly for the public usage. But Hyperledger, one of the biggest problems is that it's really not easy to approach it. There's not a lot of projects and documentations, examples on the services. So there's something, and they proved it, I believe. But still,
mostly marketing materials.
Yeah, marketing materials are really in the front of this market. So, for example, Alex will tell afterwards that, for example, there's a solution you can download it and use for your own, but it's so complicated, has no documentation, that you need to hire guys, and that's their way of monetizing it. So yeah, we'll head I think towards this hosted solution, like blockchain as a service solution, when this will come into one place. You won't need to install all those nodes, set up all those nodes. It would be simplified, wrapped up into some monthly packages and so on. So we already see some products being developed in the IBM, Microsoft, and I think more. One of the most important and interesting parts is the integration of the public and private parts. So we'll see more and more databases move to the blockchain. So it would be really great to see, okay, there's some private part inside some consortia or organization that you don't want to put out, but still you can integrate with other blockchains. And in this way, this economy and this interaction, kind of internet interactions, that would enrich both in my opinion. And already, like the NEM Foundation, they set it in the Catapult release, and we'll see how it will go. And of course, like it mostly works. Like all these term smart contracts that we have in Ethereum, it's like they try to use this also in the like permission and private blockchains, and it's really cool concept. But when we talk about the smart contract that's operated by the person, so the person needs to like click OK somewhere, it's not making it smart, it's rather a dumb contract. So the really smart contract work without the human interaction mostly. So when we have a sensor, when we have a GPS location, we have a temperature location and other sensors that automatically send the data, and the smart contracts are executed on top of them, I think they would make the biggest leverage there.
Yeah, for things like supply chain, for example, it's automation can make it just like a breeze.
Yeah, for sure. So that's all I wanted to say on the business perspective for this question on this topic. So you have anything to ask before we move to the technical part?
You know, there is already a question about blockchain as a service.
Yeah.
But I believe it would be better to answer it after the technical part.
Yeah, maybe, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll have more time afterwards. So then I'll give the place to the Alex. Alex is a really seasoned engineer. He also has experience in product manager, as product manager and people manager. And well, it's really hard to mention all the companies, the technologies he's worked on, but like his most like strongest side is mostly on the back end. He like really proud that he's also working on this like forum platform, making it better. He makes he was architecturing and developing one of our biggest project called Hive Online, one of the Danish startups. And yeah, he's
a fintech one.
Yeah, fintech one. He started his own company in the adtech space, worked with artificial intelligence, and yeah. So I'll just
a lot of stuff, but no, let's talk mostly about the blockchain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So here you go.
Yeah. Okay. And from on what I just sorry a moment.
I can just minimize it. There's
just a moment. Usability.
Okay.
Yeah, so what I'll tell, it may overlap with what Max just told, but it would be in a different context, so let's not get bored. So the first thing I wanted to discuss is the traits of enterprise blockchain, because you know usually it's the same as a public one like Bitcoin or Ethereum, but a bit different. Like the first trait, it's not public. It means like not anyone can join, and sometimes it is implemented just as a part of technology. Sometimes you use some additional tools like firewalls to prevent it, but it's a bit different. Another thing is that anonymity, that is not important. Like a precondition to Bitcoin initially is that it's all anonymous. You do not know anybody in the network, you don't trust them, and that's it. However, in a private blockchain, usually you know all the agents inside, so it's not anonymous. Another thing is transaction speed. Like when you have something like 8 or 20 transactions in public blockchains, of course, it usually doesn't work for enterprise when when, especially in, let's say, banking or some cross-border payments, you want hundreds and thousands of transactions, and it is possible with private solutions. And another thing is that support for privacy or confidentiality, it means, I already touched it a bit, that members know each other, but sometimes they do not know what each member do. It's like, for example, on a public blockchain network, there is such thing as a block explorers, so you can see all transactions from all members. However, sometimes in a private solutions, not everybody knows what is happening. Like, for example, you have a blockchain solutions that involves 3 companies. One company knows what other company does, but the third company doesn't. Let's say company A works with company B and company A works with company C. In this case, you can set the things in the way that company A sees everything. Company B is their communication with company A, but not with company C. Just an example. And another thing is that, like, ideally, when we are talking about enterprise blockchain solutions, you'd like to have it to be as close as possible to the public things, because engineering resources, tooling, documentation, and so on.
Just a second. I think somebody is on mute, and it's. Yeah, I see. Yeah, much better. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so let's continue and check if it is even possible to implement those traits of private blockchains with a public technology. So the first one is that it's not public but permission. And okay, as Max already told, it's totally possible, because usually, like, let's say in Ethereum, you have usually kind of a mainnet, testnet, public networks. However, nothing stops you from launching your own private network and working only within that network, so nobody knows about it. And if you'd like, you can even additionally limit access to it on the networking level. I mean, firewalls, stuff like that. Another thing, which is probably harder, it's transaction processing speed. So I've already touched this a bit about the Visa and MasterCard level of performance. And the thing that in general, you cannot achieve this with public blockchain. Sometimes it is possible to simplify algorithms of its consensus. So let's say, so it would be not 20 transactions per second, but let's say 100 transactions per second, but it's still slow. It's still not thousands of transactions. And there is a way actually to, let's say, to make it fast. There is just a single thing that you have in blockchain that makes it slow. It's mining. Because of mining, like, and you need mining just because of trustless environment that you have. So, like, to verify the transactions. However, what's good in permissions, or let's say private blockchain, it's where you, let's say, it's semi-trustless or even trustful, just because you know all the actors within the system. If somebody tries to hack the system inside, okay, it's not a problem. You know that it's a member of a specific organization, so you can just get rid of the money, and it will make the system much faster. And that is what used in special private blockchains. And by the way, in the near future, we'll have also technologies such as Lightning Network or Plasma. It is what's developed for public networks, for Ethereum, for Bitcoin. And it will allow you to have, let's say, to have all this public technology stack, but at the same time have much faster performance. I believe, and those technologies, they are already being tested on a test net, but I don't think they would be available in production in the near 6 or 8 months. Yeah, maybe by the end of this year.
It's totally blending together. So this Lightning Network approach somehow uses part of this permission private thing.
Yeah. And another thing that we need to discuss is privacy and confidentiality. As we already talked a bit, sometimes, let's say, you may treat blockchain more of a protocol than a database. It's like a good implementation is when you have multiple organizations and you have something, this common protocol between them. Like, for example, you have supply chain when you move in goods from one organization to another and transform them in some way. And usually, let's say, sometimes it's okay for organization that all members of this process will see everything. Sometimes you want to hide something, like I told previously. And there are a few ways to achieve it in a private blockchain or public blockchain. In public, there are special cryptocurrencies like Monero, like Zcash, like Zencash. It's anonymous cryptocurrencies when you can have anonymous transactions. That's a solutions, however, it is, let's say, but they are slow and they can't be fast just by design. So it is a solution, but quite limited. Also, you can have another solution. What is Quorum actually it is for? It's a private, let's say, private blockchain that allows you to have private transactions and private smart contracts. So only specific list of, so when you, let's say, it's like when you have a contract in the blockchain, you specify exactly which addresses, like which organizations will be able to access the contract, they will be able to see it. And there is a third approach, which is which sounds a bit tricky, but it's totally fine. The thing is that blockchain usually, let's say, in the public space, you always have like one blockchain, like one Ethereum, one Monero, one Bitcoin. However, when we are talking about organization, you could spawn multiple blockchains. That's an example. What just I told it. That, let's say you have a software on top of the blockchain that operates multiple chains. Like you have chain A for communication between companies 1 and 2. You have chain B for communication between companies 2 and 3, and so on. And again, this approach, it's totally fine, and it's specific to private blockchains. Okay, let's proceed. Okay, so the next thing is actually probably most interesting here is what are available solutions on the market. And when we're talking about it, it's like, say, we need to cross the line. It's right now it's Ethereum based and everything else. Why so? Initially, blockchain spawned from the Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's blockchain, it was, let's say, just a distributed ledger. It allows some basic logic, like let's say, get money from a specific address and split it, let's say, half and half, and send to other ones. But if you are going to implement some more tricky business logic, like for supply chain or something else, it may not work. And that's why actually Ethereum emerged, just because previously, like before it, for each usage scenario, people just created a fork of Bitcoin and launched their own cryptocurrency or their own blockchain. But Ethereum is more of a platform where you can deploy different programs or smart contracts, and they can even interact with each other. And right now, there are a few generations of blockchain software. There is blockchains based off based off Bitcoin and similar technologies. There is Ethereum and its forks, and there are a few other solutions that do not belong to either of them. Oh, and by the way, another thing is that like when you talk about Bitcoin and Ethereum, like in terms of cryptocurrencies, like it's the same thing. It's like one is cheaper, other one is more expensive, but it's the same thing. However, technology-wise, like under the hood, it's dramatically different. It's like different generations of the things, like let's say like turbo propeller aircrafts and jet engines. Okay, so now let's start with reviewing Ethereum-based solutions. And again, the first one is actual Ethereum. As told previously, you can use it in your private network just there's no problem. The only issue you'll have is that it will be slow. Sometimes it is okay, sometimes not. Another thing that I actually like a lot is the Ethermint. Ethermint is a very lightweight fork of Ethereum made specifically for this private stuff. Like what they do is that they take Ethereum, they take mining out of it, and instead of it, they put their own Tendermint consensus algorithm, the proof of stake kind. So, and actually that's it. And it makes so what is Ethermint? The idea is that you're getting a blockchain solution that is really fast. Like you have hundreds, maybe thousands of transactions per second just out of the box. And at the same time, you could use almost all of Ethereum tooling with it. I mean, like block explorers, like different wallets, like even different programming libraries that work with Ethereum, they'll work with Ethermint. So it's very valid solutions. And also it has some networking permissions also built in, but again, that's not very important. Another solution which is somehow similar is Monochain, also known now as Hyperledger Barrel. And by the way, if you don't know, Hyperledger is kind of a consortium where you have multiple blockchain solutions, usually multiple non-public blockchain solutions, like we have Barrow, Fabri, Sotus, Iroha, probably. That doesn't matter right now. So actually, Monochain inside it uses the same Tendermint algorithm, so it's also blazing fast. It's also backward compatible with Ethereum. However, it uses a bit different approach. Like inside, it has tooling specifically for creating multiple chains for the scenario that I've described above. So like you can create multiple chains of different organizations. However, it's let's say usually all of this blockchain stuff it's open source, and for Monax it's not let's say it's kind of half how open source. It means like their main product is quite open, but it's very hard to use it in production without some modifications. And if you need those modifications, probably you'll need to hire Monax specifically for consulting, for customization, for stuff like that. So sometimes it's okay, sometimes not. Let's jump to the next one. So the next one is Quorum, and which is JP Morgan's entry into blockchain space and one that I'm probably most familiar with. So like on paper, Quorum is probably the ultimate blockchain. You can just take Quorum and doesn't look on anything else just because it should be lightweight, just like Ethermint or Monax. fast again like them. It should be backward compatible with Ethereum, and another great thing that it supports private transactions and private smart contracts. However, it's also have some downsides. Like just to be clear, everything works exactly as told above. However, just to implement all those functionality, it takes a bit more heavyweight engineering approach, and as a result, it has two downsides. The first one is that Quorum is slower than Assyrian, and Monochains also it takes more CPU resources. Like the funny thing, but usually when I start, let's say, Assyrian or Quorum on my laptop, I hear all my fans. It's like it warms a lot, while Monochains on Ethermint is just cold and quiet. So that's one. So that's the downside. Also, because let's say to implement those private transactions, private contracts, Worm developers had to do many changes and in Ethereum, and the consequences, Worm lags behind in terms of development from Ethereum. So let's say if some new features like let's say Plasma network will emerge in Ethereum, it means like let's say in a few months, it would be available in Ethermint. However, in Quorum, it may take half a year or a year to implement the same thing just because it's hard. But anyway, if you need smart contracts and you need privacy, it's the best solution on the market, probably. Now, let's talk a bit about non-Ethereum based solutions. And the first one is, and probably most known one, is Hyperledger Fabri. So, you know, probably when most people try to get some information about private blockchains, the first thing they find on the internet is Hyperledger Fabri, and probably that is a product by IBM. And the thing is that IBM did a very good job. They started this private blockchain stuff before the hype. They put a lot of money into their marketing budget, into their advertising. So they have very good, let's say, they have great presentation. They have a lot of publicity, and they already have many projects launched using Hyperledger Fabri. However, because it started, it was the first private solutions, and it was based on Bitcoin era blockchain. So which was not, let's say, which was not designed for a logic intensive application. What does it mean? If you need to, let's say, instead of usual smart contracts like in Ethereum, they take other approach. They use some kind of which called chain code. It allows you not to be too technical. The thing is that it's much harder to develop some logic for it, and it's more limited than Ethereum or some other solutions. So that's why Hyperledger is great when you need it for something relatively easy, just like let's say distributed ledger, like cross-bank transfers, cross-border transfers, things like that. But not for something that requires a lot of logic, like let's say some escrow, some supply chain, and so on. However, but again, nothing wrong with Hyperledger Fabri, just the first generation of blockchain solutions. And to be clear here, probably where we are now, it's something like 1980s for relational databases. It's like all the technologies we have now, they would be probably seemed as something very tricky and way too hard, let's say, in 3 or 5 years. But that's not a problem. Oh. Now, another solution that I like a lot is a Hyperledger Sawtooth Lake. And again, that's another project in Hyperledger, but it's not as widely known as Fabri, because let's say it also have a large company behind it. It's Intel, but so to Zweig, probably from all blockchain solutions that I saw, it's um, the most non-canonical one. It was created from scratch with the idea of being very flexible and, let's say, both flexible, easy for developers, and fast. What does it mean? The first thing is that it's using some very fast consensus algorithm proof of elapsed time. Another thing is that it uses different approach to programming business logic, like Assyrian or things like that use smart contracts, which are quite limited. Like, for example, if you need to get some data outside of blockchain to the blockchain, it requires you to do some very hard tricks and still limited. Or it's maybe hard to generate a random number in a blockchain. For so to Zweig, it's much easier. They use different solutions. They call it just transaction family. The idea is that you have different kind of transaction families for different needs. Like you can, if you need, let's say, supply chain solution, okay, you'll have specific supply, you'll code specific transaction family for products, for merging of those products, for tracking their statuses, and so on. And it would be done using Python programming language, which is quite popular, have a lot of tooling, and let's say you have much more developers that are able to use Python than ones that would be able to use Solidity in Ethereum, or the ones that would use different languages to use chain code inside the Hyperledger Fabri. Another thing that I personally haven't used, but I know it is in Sotus Lake, is it support for some the security hardware from Intel. They have it built in. They have some idea that okay, they can encrypt some information on a hardware level if you buy their hardware. But again, I haven't used it personally, but I know that this one is possible. Unfortunately, for Sotus Lake, there are a few downsides. The first one is that it's not quite major. It's the first commercial project using Fabri emerged just a month ago or so. And their developer documentation is also, let's say, nearly not as good as Ethereum or Hyperledger Fabri. So it looks like something that is ahead of its time, but I hope it'll be great in the future. Okay. Also, there are other solutions on the market. The idea is that we've just talked about few of the probably most popular or let's say most straightforward ones. However, there are different solutions available from companies like Ripple or Tezos or lesser known Exonom. And you know, just because of all the hype, right now different companies that were not initially in the crypto or blockchain space, they are also trying to get a bite of this pie. Like MongoDB, which is document database, let's say they provide some blockchain solution right now. Microsoft built some kind of blockchain solutions as well. And again, it's pretty much valid, just just don't have roots in cryptocurrencies. And probably the last thing I'd like to talk about is like, what should you choose? Just because, as you can see, there are many different solutions, and say it may confuse you. Unfortunately, there is no good answer. Like there is no one size fits all here. So there are a few things you just need to take into consideration. The first one is technology and ecosystem maturity. They're just like completely different examples from, let's say, Hyperledger Fabric and Ethereum from one side, and the Hyperledger Sotus Lake from on the other side. That's the one. Like, and you know, and another let's say, thing here is availability of vendors. Like, let's say, nobody wants to start such business with a specific vendor and be locked into that vendor. So if the vendor raises prices, you just need to pay because there is nothing else on the market. So definitely you do not want to be in that situation. Another important thing is, again, the needs of your system. I've talked a few times about it. It's whether you'll be okay with just a distributed ledger or you need some more tricky logic. Again, that's where you will be okay with the Hyperledger Fabri or you need something more advanced. Another thing, which is time to market predictability, which is usually depends on developers. Like, let's say, if you use a solution that is already, let's say, have a lot of developer documentations, a lot of tooling, and so on, probably it would be much easier to predict time to market for your custom solutions on top of the blockchain than for something where documentation is very limited. And the last thing here is infrastructure cost. Just because, again, different solutions have different CPU load, hard drive load, and so on, and it requires different infrastructure to use. So let's say Assyrian, let's say original Ethereum, will require much more resources than things like Sotus Lake or Ethermint. So that's it. Probably let's go to the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
And I remember the first question was about the idea of blockchain as a service.
It was around some specific service. Let me just quickly take a look. So it was about the Erdo's idea. I'm not sure who the Erdos is.
You know, I haven't worked with Ardors, but you know, in general, when we're talking about blockchain as a service, it's pretty much valid. However, we need to understand like what is the values of it, because let's say for public blockchain, sometimes you have things like multi-signature wallets or some added security or something like that. That let's say you have something that adds value to the blockchain, and in this case, it's great solutions. Sometimes you just have a company that just hosts blockchain on their servers. In this case, it depends on the price. Maybe it'll be fine. Maybe it'll, let's say, maybe it'll be just a ripoff because you'll pay the triple price just for something that could be set up once and just monitored by your IT staff. So that depends. And when we're talking about private blockchain, probably it's not even a thing here just because each enterprise has its own IT infrastructure. So, and probably in the future, there would be some maybe cloud solutions for this, but right now, it's not even a thing.
Okay. DI, who wrote this question, do you like? Do you think it's answered? Do you have any other questions? Meanwhile,
well, thank you for the answer. I'm actually a total newbie to this, so I cannot like argue professionally. But Ardor is actually based on NXT, which is extremely established blockchain. It's probably well known to you as well, and it has all kind of features built right in. It's basically a Swiss knife. I'll just read it out loud. So asset exchange, monetary system, Alice's messaging, digital goods store, voting system, etc. So you know the list continues, and my guess would be that when you start using it out of the box, that's probably what most of the enterprises would be looking at as the max feature set they would potentially desire. So that's why I kind of brought up this particular product, because it's it's proven with the public blockchain, but now they use Ardor only because it can issue subchains for different enterprises. So yeah, please take a look at it, and thank you very much for an insightful webinar.
Thanks. And as I see from features that you described, again, let's say half of those features is possible, let's say, displaying Ethereum. Some of them could be implemented as a smart contract for Ethereum. So in this case, of course, each company should decide on their own, whether it is, let's say, like this consulting, outsourcing, and so on, whether it's better to, let's say, develop it on your side or hire some consultants for it, or just pay for this blockchain as a service solution. And again, in this space, usually, if you do not sure about something, it's better to ask consultants with some experience in the space, just because amount of information is overwhelming, and sometimes it's really hard just to get to the point.
Makes total sense. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, I think over some time it would be really practical to just create your blockchain, couple of seconds, as you create a website and domain, or Dropbox, Still for the enterprise level blockchains, sometimes cannot easily migrate from there, right?
Yeah, it's like 15 years ago when you wanted a blog, you needed to buy a hosting, buy a domain, have somebody and have yourself to let's say, upload some code to your hosting to change some settings and so on. And now you just register on WordPress.com or Medium, and that's it. Probably it will do the same for blockchain.
Let's move on to the other question. So, Jonas, please excuse me if I take it wrong. What are the key technical elements of blockchain solution where a change of it would result in a change in functionality? I don't fully get the question. So, well, basically, like we can distinguish, I think, as you said, between like more ledger-oriented and more logic-oriented blockchains.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's in general. And again, there is, when we talk about logic-oriented, there is Ethereum and everything Ethereum-based from many solutions, and everything else. Just because, let's say, you have Sotus Lake or Exonom, which is pretty much valid solutions, but they are lesser known, and so there's definitely not much information about them. So again, everything is valid, but you need to decide for specific case. Like here we use usually Ethereum-based solutions for our needs, mostly because say it's for most cases it works fine. Let's say it's not the best in all cases, but it works fine in all cases.
Sounds good. And then also Dmitry recommends us to take a look at the joint.io for the private domain.
Yeah, and Bill definitely will work on it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, overall, in my impression, there's no such a thing as lack of money on this market, and this puts many entrepreneurs and engineers to make their solutions. And well, I think some time will pass until we will see direct like main players in the market. So like before that, we would look at like IBM, Intel, like this Hyperledger initiative. We'll definitely look at the Ethereum. But now there's lots of upcomers like EOS, for example, which multi-chain, and like sometimes we get all these different requests for different technologies. Like one of the things, for example, we organize Dash and everything, and there's so many technologies. It's really hard to be proficient in all of them. You can see that when you take some specific technology, the only people who understand it good their developers and really small community of maybe tens of other engineers working around that. And well, when we were in this mobile development market, we had kind of like close situation when the era of cross-platform solutions emerged, and there were like tens of different cross-platform solutions trying to feed the gap. And like it was really hard to establish the support of, you know, like if you need to make a great product that will evolve over time, and at some moment of time you need to either extend your team or change your team, or your current engineers for some reason can't do that, you can find you good in a rough position where there's not enough availability on the engineering side, you know, not enough people efficient in that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I wanted to ask the concept, oh, let's see, it's not related for the last thing you talked about. And again, usually when you talk about the blockchain, let's see, but now it's hype, and we love blockchain, but usually it's just one of the building blocks of your infrastructure, of your applications. So it's important thing to remember. Just let's say you may have the blockchain as a protocol for some collaboration between different organizations, but at the same time you may have some relational databases, some all-up cubes, analytics, some mobile applications, a lot of stuff built around blockchain. So that's why it's not a golden bullet. You use it just for some very specific tasks, while there are a lot of stuff that you use for others.
So if there are no more questions, it was a big pleasure to discuss it with you. I really appreciated the people who talked out and proposed some questions or ideas.
And suggested us some resources like a join.
Yeah, like there is like we would like really to be in the dialogue. So if you have any further questions or suggestions, feel free to contact us. Just find us on social networks or ping us an email, and we would love to discuss it further if you'd like. So thanks again, and have a great day, evening, and so on. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.